Welcome back. We are talking about Bob Woodward's new and alarming account of President Trump, and joining us for more are Mark Weston, who has written his own book about the presidency, the runner-up presidency, and Rod Thompson, a longtime journalist, himself now of the revolutionaryact.com. And Mark, you ran out this morning and you got the book and you almost read it to cover. What's your main takeaway?
Besides what's already out there of his own Secretary of Defense saying he has the comprehension level of a 5th or 6th grader, or the Chief of Staff saying he was an idiot, what floored me was his lack of a work ethic. He apparently shows up for work at 11 or 11:30 in the morning, and one of the reasons is he watches 6 to 8 hours of television a day. Even on a sunny Saturday at his golf club, he spends 6 to 8 hours watching TV.
But that brings up two very different issues. We could get into the debate about, some of those who he talks about saying that they never talk to him, but also the work ethic. Let's start with there, Rod, because I would imagine that a lot of the Trump supporters say they don't care about the work ethic because look at the results.
Well, the results are really what matters for a president, and that certainly is true. Work ethic doesn't really matter unless, I'm an employer and you're my employee, then your work ethic matters to me. But as far as with the president, we care about the results for the country. I don't know exactly where even that would come from, because on the campaign trail, when you were comparing him to Hillary Clinton, he was running circles around her as far as number of events he was doing in a day after day, week after week, month after month for the long haul. That strikes me as somebody that can put in long hours. We know he gets up early because of when he's tweeting, so we know he's up early.
If that's the case, you could ask, well, why doesn't he put in those hours in the Oval Office, actually reading about what he is talking about?
So I don't know, and we'll get into the credibility of Bob Woodward's book here at some point. I don't know why. I know a lot of the TV time he's watching news. A lot of it's Fox News, but clearly it's also MSNBC and others. So a lot of that TV time, he's also watching news programs. So it's not like he's watching cartoons or something like the suggestion with the 5th grade comprehension level, which was denied.
But the Deputy Chief of Staff said don't put more than one page on his desk. Even if he glances at it, he won't read very much of it. This is a president who absolutely does not read.
Why don't we take a look at what the president himself has said about Woodward's book in an interview just a day ago.
You shouldn't be talking about that right now because it doesn't matter, but I really appreciate their statement. Their statement was excellent, and they both sent out beautiful, which shows that the book is just a piece of fiction.
All right, so we get into this now, and Mark, and I'll start with you. From General Kelly, the Chief of Staff, to the Secretary of Defense, to Gary Cohn, to name it, they're saying we never said those things. As somebody who's a journalist and an author yourself, how do you respond to that?
Bob Woodward is the author of 2 books about the Nixon administration, 2 books about the Clinton administration, 5 books about the 2 Bush administrations, and 2 books about the Obama administration. And they have all stood the test of time. You haven't seen officials from, do you get something wrong in a 360-page book? Sure. But overall, it's over the test of time. These books are thought to be true accounts of these administrations. And so to say suddenly that this man has not written a credible book is really wishful thinking on Trump supporters' part.
Rod, I know you want to respond to that, but guess what?
Time.
We have to pay the bills. We are just getting warmed up. Our conversation on Bob Woodward's book, Fear Trump in the White House, will continue after a quick break. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are talking about Bob Woodward's new and alarming account of President Trump, and joining us for more are Mark Weston, who has written his own book about the presidency, the runner-up presidency, and Rod Thompson, a long-time journalist himself, now of the revolutionaryact.com. So, Mark, let me ask you, we have a hurricane bearing down on the Carolinas right now. It is the 17th anniversary of 9/11. We have so many things on our mind right now. What did you read today in this book that has just come out is so alarming to you that we need to be talking about it tonight?
Well, it's already been out that Gary Cohn, his economic advisor, removed a piece of paper from the desk in the Oval Office because he didn't want Trump signing a letter to the South Koreans that would have ended free trade between South Korea and the United States. He felt that this would also alter the military relationship. And General Mattis was also, the defense secretary was also against foregoing the free trade agreement with South Korea. And one of the things that he argued was if we have, and Trump all throughout the book is always wanting to send the troops in South Korea home. He doesn't want the American troops there. He feels it's a waste of money. And General Mattis pointed out, with troops in South Korea, we can detect a North Korean missile launch 7 seconds after the launch and do something about it. If we don't have troops in South Korea and we have to watch it from Guam or Alaska, we don't see the launch until it's already up there for 15 minutes.
So, Rod, you hear these comments from Mattis, from Gary Cohn, from everybody else in there, and do you get concerned hearing this?
Not particularly, no. For one thing, in the biggest picture, we always know that Trump is an extraordinarily unusual president in his methodologies, and his personality, et cetera. You know, I have certainly my issues with some of the way he goes about things and with his personal life. Having said that, my concern more is with the Bob Woodward book. His reputation, which I dispute is not, and his credibility is not actually in, without some disrepute going along the lines from other journalists, but also what it means to the media credibility in the bigger picture. But in Bob Woodward himself, whether you go back to his Belushi book, all the way through to when he did the CIA book and he had Bob Casey sitting up out of a coma and confessing, which he stands by to this day, and that is the most laughable thing. But there's more, and I wanted to read something because, you know, Seymour Hersh, New York Times, multiple Pulitzer Prize winner, had got so frustrated with Woodward and his lazy and uncareful ways of doing journalism and of doing his books. He says, and I cleaned it up, "It hurts me to believe that he's in my effing profession." So Bob Woodward has real credibility issues among other journalists, and part of it is the way he uses anonymous sources.
You know, people who know journalists and journalism will say that Seymour Hersh has done a couple of things in his career that people take issue. But, you know, and I'm sorry, Greg, our producer, because I didn't put this on the screen here, but the New York Times in its review of the book said today, his utter devotion to just the facts, digging and compulsory interviews preserved on tape for his book make him a reliable narrator. In the age of fake facts and corrosive tweets, fake news, Woodward is a true gold standard. Let's take a look for a moment in terms of what Bob Woodward says about all the talk about people who are quoted in the book saying, no, I never said that. Let's take a look.
One key person who's in office called me and said, everyone knows what you've said here is true. It's 1,000% correct. And then this person has said some public things that contradict that.
I would imagine a lot of people who are in the administration are in a tough place when it comes to the quotes and the stories that are in the book.
Again, we have to take Bob Woodward's word for it. And the problem here is that he uses what's called deep background sourcing, which is where not only do you not attribute it, you don't attribute it in a way, you make sure it cannot be traced back. So you don't do any identifying markers on the source for your thing. That's the deep background as opposed to just general background. That's how Woodward does these books. The problem there is there's zero accountability. So you always end up with these situations. We either have to take Bob Woodward's word for it, and there are people who love him and people that hate him based on credibility issues within the profession, or we have to believe those who also have mixed motives for whether they would tell him one thing privately and say something else publicly. So I can't take this book and say, oh my gosh, look what's really happening, because this book does not in any way persuade me that, oh my gosh, this is really happening.
Mark, is this, I mean, in terms of your reading of the book, and you are a well-known author and journalist in your own right, and you have followed Bob Woodward's career, who has more credibility? Or is this an issue of Woodward's credibility versus Trump's credibility?
I'm old enough to remember the Watergate scandal when the Nixon administration attacked Woodward and Bernstein of the Washington Post every day. And then Woodward and Bernstein turned out to be right, and the Nixon administration turned out to be lying. You should also know that Fred Barnes, a regular commentator on Fox News, says that Bob Woodward is the greatest pure reporter of our generation, perhaps of all time.
Right, there are mixed opinions on Bob Woodward. My point is that those opinions are mixed. It's not all salutary across the board for Bob Woodward, and because of that, and because of this sourcing issue, and honestly, Alan, the Bob Woodward book is one thing, and it'll be done, it'll be taken by some people. I don't see this book as persuading anybody. changing anybody's mind. But it goes to the question of the credibility of the media with anonymous sources, and even to the New York Times choosing to use an opinion piece by an anonymous source, which is highly unusual. This is the sort of thing that really cuts into a credibility gap.
Mark, I wanted to give you a chance to respond to that, and then I have a question.
Well, you also have Michael Wolff's book, Fire and Fury, and Omarosa Newman's book, Unhinged, which basically all three, but that may be, but all three are giving the same picture of the White House. They're fairly consistent.
So, Mark, that brings us to the question, are people going to take out of this book everything that they would in terms of the other books? Either you don't like the president and you're finding ammunition for that in Woodward's book, or you are a true believer in the president and what he is doing, and really nothing that anybody could say, whether it's a Pulitzer Prize was winning a reporter or not, is really going to make any difference.
Well, you get a sense in this book that Trump, and probably rightly so, has great faith in his own intuitive instincts, and he apparently doesn't like to prepare because he feels that his off the cuff will be better than if he had prepared for something. But most issues in the world are complex. There aren't that many totally black and white issues. John Kennedy used to say, I never have to decide between the good and the bad. I have to decide between the bad and the really bad. And so you need a president who can have some nuance.
Rod, let me ask you this question. People who believe in this president and support him are unlikely to change their opinions by this book. You know Democrats and people don't like him, or you're not going to find any reason that they're going to like the president. The fight is over the middle. And if you look at the recent public opinion surveys, his approval rating has been going down. I think it's like 6 points within the last month. Putting your political hat on for a moment, is that what you're concerned about?
Oh, absolutely. No, that's a big problem, because that can roll over into the midterms, right? That can have a splashover effect. But I have a couple of concerns there. Number one is that it's not really super surprising to me, because he has been hammered with this sort of stuff, rolling one on top of another on top of another. And yeah, he does self-inflicted wounds all over the place. There's no doubt about that.
Is he being hammered, or are these wounds self-inflicted?
Both, because he's being held to a standard, a level of scrutiny that nobody else would. There is no way, if the New York Times had been provided an anonymous opinion piece that would have been trashing Barack Obama in the same way, for one thing, it wouldn't happen because Obama required a whole lot more loyalty, apparently, than Trump can at least get.
Well,
the New York Times would never have run it.
Because Obama didn't raise the same kind of questions in terms of basic competency that this president
It wouldn't have happened because the New York Times has been a very partisan paper, but it has been dramatically more so since November 2016. And even within the profession, within some of my colleagues in the profession get a little bit embarrassed at both the New York Times and CNN while holding still fast to the rest of the profession.
Mark, I want to give you a chance to respond.
Well, the Times was very tough on Bill Clinton. I can remember reading the paper and just getting angry.
It's a different paper now, I think. I do think so, Mark.
Well, I think the country as a whole is more polarized. When you think of the Clinton-Dole election in 1996, you know, most Democrats thought Bob Dole was too conservative, but basically a good guy. In the second term, Bill Clinton was somewhat popular. There hadn't been any sex scandal yet, so most Republicans could live with Bill Clinton. It's much more polarized now. There's no doubt about it.
Right. We have to take another quick break, but we'll be back for final thoughts in just a moment, so stay with us. And our guests join us right now for final thoughts. So, Mark, you've read through this book, and I know how you probably feel about Bob Woodward here, but considering that there have been other books, whether it's by Omarosa or Michael Wolff, that have had similar bombastic accusations, but been easily, talked about by the president's supporters because of the problems with the authors. Is this just going to be another book that, along those lines, or is this going to be a book that really kind of, stays in our history like, his Watergate books?
Both. It will stay in history. It will be a book that people will consult for decades, even 100 years from now. But no, it won't convince Trump supporters. They're going to need smoking guns from the Mueller investigation if they exist. Short of that, I don't think they'll change their minds.
Hey, Rod, I'll ask you the same question. And of course, the Mueller investigation is, first thing, the book doesn't take on the Mueller investigation and Russian collusion or obstruction of justice. This is about the president and his time in the Oval Office here. And the question is, and I know that you've been critical of the president in terms of his tweets and so forth, but When you hear consistently in terms of the way he makes his decisions and how he treats his staff and what the staff reportedly thinks it has to do, does it give you any kind of pause?
Not a lot, for a couple reasons. I remember when, I don't mind a president who steps way back and just does sort of the big picture and doesn't try and get into the minutia of understanding everything. We've had, I think Jimmy Carter was a great example of how that doesn't work, where he took care of everything down to the tennis court schedules at the White House, right? And he was a pretty smart man, pretty good man, but he was a terrible president. Part of the reason he was a terrible president was he needed to understand the minutia of every single detail that he was dealing with. I think far better managers, the larger the corporation, the larger the organization, the more they can delegate to others and just give sort of big picture direction, the better. And it's been working.
So Mark, let me ask you, what is the difference between Ronald Reagan, who was a big picture guy, and Donald Trump, who is a huge picture guy?
I have a very conservative friend from California who dealt with Ronald Reagan as a governor and was amazed at how prepared Ronald Reagan was on this particular issue. The best management books say that, yes, you shouldn't get into the details of everything, but then one or two places here and there you should get into extreme detail. And the good leader will know when to go into extreme detail and when to totally trust your subordinates. Donald Trump is not capable of getting into detail on anything.
Gentlemen, I'm afraid that we have to leave it right there. We want to thank our guest, Mark Weston, who has written his own book about the presidency, The Runner-Up Presidency, and Rod Thompson, a longtime journalist himself, now of the RevolutionaryAct.com.